Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rembach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I am totally excited because I have somebody who really is leading the way in giving us some very important evidence associated with what does it take in order to have a high-performing organization from the inside. Jim Harter was born in Iowa and has lived in the Midwest his entire life, nearly all in Nebraska. Jim is the second oldest of 6 siblings, 1 older brother, 1 younger, and 3 younger sisters. His parents both grew up in central Nebraska and moved the family back to Nebraska from Iowa as Jim was entering 3rd grade to a town with about 3,000 residents called Aurora. He went to middle school and high school in another small town called the Cowboy Capital, Ogallala, Nebraska. His grandfather was a local sheriff in central Nebraska, and father, a Marine Corps veteran, was mayor for many years. Jim learned valuable lessons from his parents and grandparents that would later influence his chosen profession. For one, they were all different and had different things to teach. Some lessons included the importance of understanding each person, their past and current situation, and this planted some seeds for an interest in studying people. The importance of community, service, and leadership, the importance of having an unpretentious, down-to-earth approach, and the importance of positivity and hard work. His persistent grandma is 96 years old and still going strong. Jim worked through high school, washing dishes at a local restaurant, and then a cook. After high school graduation, he enrolled at the University of Nebraska, had many jobs during college ranging from hauling gas to local farmers, changing oil in cars, throwing hail bales, and hauling irrigation pipe on relatives' farms. Jim completed his first college degree in his family in business administration back in 1986. During that last year of his bachelor's degree, he had a fortuitous turn of events. He signed up for several internships to gain some hands-on work experience. One of the internships was with an organization called Selection Research, Inc., a family-owned research organization started by Don Clifton, later named the father of strengths-based psychology by the American Psychological Association. This internship led to an invitation to work with Don and colleagues on personnel research, studying the innate talent of top performers in many different types of jobs and the study of productive work environments. Jim was then inspired to expand his skills and completed his master's and Ph.D. in psychological measurement while working full-time at SRI, which later merged and took on the name of Gallup. Jim is now the chief scientist of workplace for Gallup. He has led more than 1,000 studies of workplace effectiveness, including the largest ongoing meta-analysis of human potential and business unit performance. He's the best-selling author of 12, The Elements of Great Managing and Wellbeing, The 5 Essential Elements, and is the co-author of It's the Manager with Gallup's chairman and CEO, Jim Clifton. Jim and his wife, Relinda, live in the Omaha, Nebraska area and have 2 grown sons, Joe and Sam. Relinda and Joe also work at Gallup, and Sam is completing his degree. The family loves sports and has had a chance to travel a lot together over the years. Jim Harter, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I'm ready, Jim. Thanks for the intro.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I've given my Legion a little bit about you, but can you tell us what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
Well, my goal in the work that we do here at Gallup is to improve lives while we improve performance. So everything kind of fits into that realm. I'm a researcher, so I try to make research as practical as possible. So one of my goals is to simplify it, to go in deep, but then to bring out some simple principles that people can apply easily.
All right, I have to ask, Jim, because I have had the opportunity to go through It's a Manager, and you talk about it. It really isn't a book. It's a desk reference, and it does have so much insight, and the appendices are full of that research that you're referring to. And I have to think, even though we have all this empirical evidence, we have this data that is giving us very solid proof on what we should be doing, it seems like there's a huge disconnect when we try to apply it. And then it's almost like emotion or laziness or something takes over and we forget all of this proof. Why do you think that is?
Well, you're right. The science of management has advanced significantly in recent decades. And so we know a lot about what should be done, but when it comes down to it, it's not getting applied on a daily basis. So there's kind of a gap. And I think it has to do with the systems. Well-intentioned systems have been put in place over time, like some of the performance management systems where it seems right to give someone an annual review. But when we get to the annual review and we don't do all the things before the annual review, right, like the ongoing conversations, the annual review loses credibility. And so we put in systems that we think seem fair, but we haven't taken into account human nature, in my opinion. And we've got to leverage human nature when we're thinking about applying these scientific principles.
Well, and as you're talking, and I'm thinking about this, it's almost like talking about productivity. Is that are we still transforming and trying to move away from the Taylorism, that we have essentially built, our society upon when it comes to, productivity and manufacturing, and now that we're going more into this service and knowledge worker work, we have not left that yet. Is that kind of what's happening here? Is that transition or transformation?
I think that's the transition we're going through now. So command and control has worked to some extent. It hasn't always been great for people, but it's worked in terms of getting big buildings built and infrastructure. And you can see all the architecture around. I was just at an architecture conference last week. You can see all the amazing architecture around the world. A lot of it came through command and control. Now, I'd argue even in the past, it would have been better to have been utilizing a coaching kind of relationship with people and move from a culture of boss to coach. That's really what people want. But today's workforce is kind of demanding that. They're asking for a culture that moves from boss to coach. They don't want a manager who's focused on their weaknesses, or at least becomes an expert on their weaknesses. They certainly want to improve and develop. We all do, but they want it based in strengths. Based in knowing who they are individually.
Well, and one of the things with that transformation that becomes a critical pivot point, I call it a linchpin, is something that you reference very early on in this desk reference. And this is how you actually state it. And it says, the single most profound, distinct, and clarifying finding ever in all of the research going back 80 years with the founder of George Gallup is probably this one thing, and that is 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined solely by the manager. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, we have been studying the engagement of workers for a couple decades now. Formally, we'd collected a lot of data on job attitudes prior to that. But one of our observations was that across these 40 million people and 4 million teams, there's massive variation in how engaged workers are, even within the same organizations. In fact, there's 70% as much variation in any one organization in general as there is across all organizations. That shows you how much you go into any organization, you see massive variance across teams. That gives you some insight into first. There's a point of intervention, and that's at the manager level. Culture is kind of built locally. All organizations want an overarching culture that supports their intentions, whether it's an agile culture of diversity and inclusion, whatever that might be. But it really happens at a local level. So what we did is we studied a lot of different elements that might explain that variability, and it really kind of comes down to the manager's own engagement affects the engagement of the team, how the team perceives those manager behaviors, whether they think positively about that manager, whether that manager is doing some things that inspire them. And then we also looked at the innate traits or tendencies of the managers, and all those things combined explained about 70% of that variance. It doesn't mean the manager is the only element that matters, but the manager sets a tone. The local manager, and it's really the local manager at all levels, starting with the executive team, onto middle managers, and then onto the front line. That's where you explain most of the variability, and really the key to building a productive culture of whatever type you're trying to build starts with the manager endorsing it and kind of interpreting it for their local team and helping that team know that what they're doing affects the rest of the organization. It also has a lot to do with whether teams cooperate with one another or not.
So this whole silo mentality and all of those things, as far as, us versus them, when it's internal, I mean, you're talking about all of that just feeding one another. And so this statistic that we're talking about, saying how 70% of the variability is really impacting it, I start thinking also about these changing demands in the workforce. You alluded to it a moment ago, but you actually have a particular, very simple chart talking about past and future. And you talk about in the past, people thought my paycheck. Now they are thinking, and really it's today. It's not just future. It's my purpose that they're focusing in on. In the past, it was my satisfaction. Now it's my development. It used to be my boss. Now it's my coach, and you've already talked about that. You hit on that. And then was my annual review. You can hit on that. And now it's an ongoing conversation about that development. It used to be my weaknesses. Now we want to focus in on my strengths. And it used to be my job. Now it's my life. And, we have now that more of that blended approach. So is it that we could see, as we're going through this transformation, that 70% getting even higher?
It's possible. In fact, I would argue from all the data I've had a chance to look at and our teams looked at that 70% is pretty conservative even right now. That in most environments, the manager has even more than 70% influence. But if you think about how the workforce is transitioning with technology now, and our work and life are blended, the importance of the manager and the complexity of management is even greater, because you've got people that are in remote situations. We can be really well planned in terms of how we do things remotely, where people know what they're expected to do. They might have a box of materials that give them exactly what they need to do their work, all well planned out. But yet, what's missing in that kind of situation are the connections that we get when we're at work, right? So managers have to be very purposeful about connecting people. That ups the ante a little bit in terms of what managers need to bring to the table. In a matrix organization, which there's a lot more matrix environments now where people work on multiple teams, maybe even have multiple team leaders. In that setting, there tends to be more collaboration because people just have more people, more chances to collaborate. But expectations are at risk. So what do I do first? And that you have to have a manager kind of help you think through those priorities on a more continuous basis, and not just revisit them at the end of the year, right? The manager has to be in the action with the employees, so to speak, and know what's going through their life to help them reestablish priorities and set them on a more continuous basis. So that the demands and complexity of management is even greater. So to your point, Jim, I think you're right that percentage could continue to go up.
In addition to that, I start thinking about how people are being developed before they even hit the workplace. Going back to our school systems, it's a Prussian school system that was designed to create that productivity worker to fit in the Taylorism, world. We don't have that anymore. So I think for organizations thinking that they're just going to find talent that is capable of taking that leader role of today, not just tomorrow, it's extremely difficult. They're going to have to develop them, and it needs to be part of the inherent nature of working in an organization that they're developing these skills within these leaders.
Yeah, and most organizations aren't in any position, unless they're just growing very quickly to just change out all of their managers, right? They've got to have a development strategy around that. And there are more efficient development strategies than others, and we can talk about that if you want. But I would argue from everything that we've had a chance to look at, about half of it is who you pick, how you select the people who become your people managers or leaders, and the other half of it is how you develop them. And they're both extremely important. And you have to be working on both. Every next decision has to be the right one. And a lot of that comes back to how you build a culture about giving individual contributors esteem and status to be great individual contributors if that's the right fit for them, and give people the right kinds of experiences so they know whether they really want to manage people or not. Because some people, once they get into it, it's not good for them or the people they manage, and so they can still learn a lot and get better through the right development and education. But that selection piece is also important.
I think you bring up a really important point. I always talk about that people have a misconception thinking that growth means I have to take one step up a vertical, ladder or rung in an organization, and that isn't the case. I mean, having a bigger base of skill and staying where you are and growing within that spot, there's a lot of significance and value for an organization in that, and I think we need to redefine, what mastery, what responsibility, what leading actually is.
Yeah, I agree. The first step really is what are we going to accept overall in our organization as the job demands of a manager or team leader, and that people component has to be heavily weighted in there. How we get things done is through people and through managers who really become experts at individualizing. That everybody's kind of trying to target some outcomes that they're trying to get to as an organization. And we can all set really clear objectives and outcomes that are aligned with what the organization is trying to get done. But each person's going to get there in a somewhat different way. And that seems complicated, that we've got to individualize across thousands of people in an organization, but it's not so complicated if we get the right people managing them who naturally think in terms of individual differences, and also giving them some tools as shortcuts, to get there more quickly. So it's both kind of getting the right people in and giving them the right tools, I think.
Well, as part of that, you refer to the employee experience in the book, and for me, it's kind of like that journey that can be individual. I mean, it could be frameworks, and it could be a path that people can go through, but knowing that not everybody is going to, like you say, go down that path at the same rate of acceleration. Velocity is different, and the individuals involved with velocity. So you talk about attracting, hiring, onboarding, engaging, perform, and develop, and then also you say depart. So I found it interesting that you would say depart. Why do you say depart?
Well, everybody at some point in time is going to leave an organization, and I think we need to be thoughtful about how that happens before you get to that stage. Is somebody actually developing when they're departing? That'd be the best case, really, because then they become an advocate for your organization and your brand. One of the things we've found with the employee experience is that with technology now, what happens in an organization goes external very quickly. So the employment brand really is your real culture. It's not something you just advertise anymore. It's something that has to really be lived out. And that happens at departure also. When people leave, what do they say about you? Whether that's for retirement and how you set them up for that in the right kind of way, or whether it's going to another job where they might be able to get to the next level in terms of where they're trying to get in their career that just is a better fit for them. One element of that is just helping people know what they contributed. Outside of people that might do something unethical, you want everybody to know what they contributed to your organization if they've been there for a significant amount of time at all, and how they helped your organization get better. Usually people leave, they never hear about that, or they don't even have a chance to talk to their manager about, they're about leaving before it happens, and it just happens. The other thing about departure on the downside is that about half of people tell us at some point in their career they've left a job because they had a bad manager. So there's that too. So that again speaks to the importance of the manager. But all those phases you discussed, Jim, are essential to get that last piece right. Not that we're targeting departure, but we're really targeting development and performance. The other thing about that particular employee experience framework is that most people will be able to accept that the attraction part happens in every organization, the hiring part happens, some form of onboarding happens, but the middle stuff, I kind of say that's where stuff happens, right? And we don't have a good system about how the stuff happens appropriately in terms of performance management, engaging them, developing them. Are they developing through their performance? Are we getting people done through work, or are we getting work done through people? That's something that Don Clifton talked a lot about, that we need to change the mentality. He was my mentor for 17 years. You discussed him in the intro. He said we need to change our mentality from getting work done through people to getting people done through work. And if we think about it that way, we're going to build the right kind of employment brand.
Well, speaking of that Don Clifton influence, you also have mentioned the shortcut, right, to development. And you talk about this strength-based conversation in chapter 14. And you start that chapter out with a particular quote that obviously is influenced by him, if didn't maybe even come from him. It says, if you're a manager, you have to ask yourself, am I an expert on my team members' weaknesses or on their strengths?
Yeah. So our default, unfortunately, as human beings, is it's really easy for us to notice what's wrong. That probably has something to do with why we're still around as a species, right? We can avoid danger. We can sense danger pretty quickly. We can fix stuff pretty quickly. So we have to kind of change our mentality and leverage another part of human nature, which is about all of us have a desire for recognition. We all have a desire to know what we do best and to be in a position where we can continuously develop our strengths. And so as managers, we have to think about, and team leaders, we have to think about how we're very intentional about becoming an expert first on who that person is and develop them through who they are as a starting point, and not try to cookie cutter everybody into a particular way of getting things done. And that's maybe one of the best learnings that I've had over the years is that you've got to be authentic to yourself, and your manager, if they understand who you are, they can help you be authentic to yourself and develop skills that complement who you are and still get to the same kinds of outcomes that someone else might get to in a somewhat different way. We did a study where we asked people to relive their previous work days, and we had them tell us what they did during that day, how they spent their time, whether they enjoyed what they were doing. And what we found is that people who were highly engaged reported 4 times as much time using their strengths as doing activities that they don't do too well. So as a 4-to-1 ratio, the people who are actively disengaged, these are people that are pretty angry at the place they work, at their organization. And for them, it was a ratio of 1-to-1. Strengths and what you don't do well. So if as managers and team leaders we think that strengths and weaknesses is a balancing act of some kind, we're kind of off track, because the weakness stuff stings so much that you need that 4-to-1. And if you're focused on someone's strengths more continuously, you're also building trust, so you can have those candid conversations with them on an ongoing basis, and you can be very open in terms of your dialogue, and people don't feel as threatened.
Yeah, well, as you're talking, I start thinking about, that expectation setting component, because a lot of times you talk about where we have opportunities for improvement to make a difference. A lot of it is in that expectation piece. And in chapter 17, you talk about the right expectations, and that there's 7 that are necessary for success in any role, which I found interesting. And you elaborate within this chapter about what, how it does impact any role. However, those 7 are build relationships, develop people, lead change, inspire others, think critically, communicate clearly, and create accountability. And you're saying every single role, every single level, all parts of the organization. So I have to go back to that whole, are we talking about matrix organizations? Are we talking about, is there a particular type, or is it truly universal?
Well, we reviewed hundreds of different competency models in our own past work over decades and studying the job demands of various roles. And those hundreds of different competencies all folded into these 7. We would argue, and I know it's a little bit of a hump for some people to get over, to think that everybody in every role should be developing people, should be leading change, should be inspiring others. But if we think about starting with our strengths, and we've actually mapped this out. So if we think about the strengths that we each have individually and how we might apply them to these, we can all get better at each of these 7. And I think in the new workforce that's coming, in some cases it's already here, we need to expect everybody to be thinking about how they develop people around them by using their own strengths. Maybe that's through their analytical approach. Maybe it's through the relationships they build. But if we think about an organization that is thriving in the future, it'll be one where everybody's participating and leading change, whether that's just endorsing it as an example and people see that you're endorsing it, or whether it's more vocal. That's going to depend on the person as well. Now, that said, the managers and team leaders at each level of the organization are going to be the ones who set the tone for all this. But they can certainly expect everybody that they work with, no matter what their role is, to be thinking about how they get better at each one of these.
Well, and so that kind of leads up to, you talk about the 5 coaching conversations. And so those 5 coaching conversations, are part of that, making it come to life and having it to be, executable. And part of this is talking about that empirical evidence. It says almost half of employees report that they receive feedback from their managers only a few times or less in the past year. And what's more, only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they receive helps them do their work better. So it's okay, what are we talking about? So those 5 conversations are about role and relationship orientation, quick connect, check in, developmental coaching, and then progress reviews. So it's that constant touch and that development piece and that path piece and the acceleration piece. It's that individualism that you're talking about. And then you talk about the best progress review is that we're talking about my purpose, my goals, my metrics, my development, my strategy, and my team. Now, you had mentioned a little while ago talking about that whole hierarchical parts of an organization. And when we start thinking about learning and development, a lot of times it's just reserved for those people at the executive level. It doesn't really filter down to that, frontline leader. I mean, it's the trickle down effect of leadership skills does not happen, right?
Yeah.
But when you start talking about the frameworks that are necessary, I mean, it's right here. I mean, this is just a simple, very executable framework that everybody can actually leverage regardless of where they are in the organization, and it becomes part of my cadence of leading. And I think ultimately when we put all of this together, it leads to something that you have that talks about really the microeconomic path. And so for me, this is where the customer experience and all that comes into play. We talk about today's work, the experience economy, impacting a customer, retaining a customer, influencing a customer to refer, is that ultimately this goes from identifying strengths, the right fit, great managers, engaged employees, engaged customers, sustainable growth, real profit increase, and then if you're publicly traded, stock increases. So I have to start thinking about how many organizations, talking about this research that you've done, are really making that microeconomic path part of what they're doing so that it has positive impact.
I think most organizations now are well-intentioned in terms of attempting it, but I think they're doing it through, let's just call them programs. Like, let's just take employee engagement, for instance. In most organizations I've observed, it's like an annual event. It's kind of synonymous with the employee survey. So it's kind of gone back to, if you take a look at what's being measured, even in many cases, it's closer to what you think of as satisfaction and high levels of engagement, where you've got involvement, enthusiasm of employees. So part of it's the metric, but the other part of it is everything, and that's the first thing, but there's a lot more that has to happen, right? You've got to have, you mentioned the ongoing conversations. The principles that go into a good engagement metric have to be filtered into the learning and development, the performance management, everything that's happening continuously. So one important principle is setting clear expectations. That's got to be a part of everything on an ongoing basis. It can't just be a survey, right? It's got to be it's got to be in your learning and development. It's got to be in your performance management. What about having a chance to do what you do best? Same thing. Strengths-based principles have to be embedded in the whole thing to make it work right, to make it work efficiently. Recognition and praise. People feeling cared about and that they're developing. Those have to be a part of the expectations of managers and team leaders throughout the year, not just when the survey is coming around at the end of the year. And so the key is to get those, you mentioned, Jim, the ongoing conversations, those are really critical to getting this right. The thing that can kind of come across to feel a little awkward is that, let's say you've been managing someone for 5 years and you've never had these ongoing conversations with them. And so suddenly you start doing it. It feels a little awkward to you, probably feels a little awkward to them because it hasn't happened before. But that's where the strengths piece comes in, I think, that makes it a lot less awkward. You're starting kind of over by getting to know that person based on who they are, putting some language around who they are that they can accept and you can accept, and that starts to build some trust. And to take away from that, if you can get those first and last parts of those ongoing conversations right, the middle stuff happens pretty naturally. So the two slowdown conversations are role and relationship orientation. You're slowing down with the individual, thinking about the future, thinking about their past, getting to know them as an individual. The last one we call semi-annual review, not annual review, but semi-annual. Every 6 months, the slowdown conversation around the things you listed off, around their team, around their performance, around their future, really a very future-oriented conversation more than anything about their development. And then the ones in between happen a lot more naturally. We're just checking in, how you doing? Anything getting in your way? What can I help you with? And in some cases, it could be a 5 to 10 minute developmental conversation where you make an observation about them that changes their life, or it could be a longer conversation that's developmental, like 30 minutes, but or an hour, whatever it happens to be. But those middle conversations, the more frequent ones, make a lot more sense to people if you get the first and the last one right.
Well, Jim, there's also one of the things that I find very interesting about what you've put together here in this desk reference is that there's a unique code. Can you tell us about the unique code that's in here as well?
Yeah, there's a code so that everybody, I've been talking about strengths a lot, so that everybody can learn their top 5 strengths and also have access to other tools that we've made available. We try to create, I mentioned shortcuts, try to create some shortcuts for people to get to know one another and have good conversations. The reason that Don Clifton invented strengths, and it was really a buildup of decades and decades of research, but the reason that he originally started doing the measurement wasn't just for the measurement, it was to create more productive conversations between people. It's really about improving conversations that people have. And so it's been a very useful tool. Over 20 million people have taken it around the world. And it's been useful in creating those kinds of conversations so that the starting point's a little different, I guess is the way I think about it. Your starting point for development and everything else that happens around that starts with the person, who they are, and then how they develop within the context of who they are, as opposed to trying to become someone they're not.
Well, without a doubt, when we start talking about the research that you conduct, even though we talk about that empirical thing, and I always used to say, because I worked for a researcher measuring the customer experience for 15 years, I always used to say that data has no heart. We have to give it the opportunity to have some emotion and emotional connection and tie it back. One of the ways that we actually create emotional connection and drive here at the show is we talk about our favorite quotes. So is there a quote or two that inspires you that you can share?
I think that the one I mentioned earlier has been one that's really stuck with me when I knew Don Clifton and had worked with him, and that if our goal is to instead of getting work done through people, to get people done through work, then we get a lot more work done, and we also help people reach their aspirations. And I think that's one of the goals that I have in my work and have for some time, is improving lives while we improve performance. And I think I know the research is very clear that we can do both at the same time if we just focus on the right kinds of elements.
Without a doubt. And however, I would dare to say that, you've been pretty fortunate talking about, your growing up, in the family environment, mm-hmm. having a lot of, societal servants, in your life influencing you, having to learn the hard work that's necessary in order to really get where you are. However, I'm sure there were some humps that caused you to be redirected, pivoted. You talked about the internship and how that was a blessing, but I'm sure it wasn't all an easy path. And we have humps that we have to get over that help define us and get us to where we are today. Is there one of those times that you remember that you have had to get over the hump that you can share?
Well, trying to complete a dissertation, I would say, was a big one while I was working full time. And so I had to get over that. And I just told myself, one of my themes is achiever and the other one's focus. So I was able to kind of stay on top of that. But I advise students on dissertations all the time, and I advise them that the number one goal you have is to get it done. Don't try to solve all the world's problems. I took on trying to learn a new computer program for my dissertation. I probably should have done something a little bit easier than that, but it helped me learn a lot, and I got that done. And So that was, I mean, I think anybody that goes through a doctoral program knows that getting that through that dissertation is a big hump to get over, and you feel like it kind of frees you up to just do more of what you already, enjoy doing once you get over that.
So when you start talking about that dissertation process, I mean, I've heard stories too. I have not had the willingness to attempt to go through that process because it can be quite rigorous. Is there one particular aspect of that you've been now able to take and use it maybe as a strength opportunity that you didn't see going into it?
Yeah, there are a couple things. One I alluded to just a few minutes ago about I advise people to do something meaningful to you in terms of your dissertation and your project, because you'll just have more fun getting it done. But also don't try to solve all the world's problems with your dissertation. The other is make sure that you pick committee members who are really sincerely interested in your development. And if those committee members get along, you'll get through the process a lot better. It'll be more fun for you. So I was very intentional. I had some great committee members on my doctoral dissertation team, and they got along. They liked each other. They were all interested in my development and knew my work demands as well while I was doing it. And so they allowed me to go to school while I was working full time, which for me meant it was a much better learning experience because I was practicing what I was learning, But it was a lot. That was the other part of that big hump, was just all the time it takes to do both those things at the same time, work and school. The other advantage I had, and a lot of organizations are moving to this now, is Gallup has always been, and SRI before then has always been, an organization that allowed flex time. So all the way back to 1985 when I started with the organization, we had flex time. So as long as we got our work done, we could do it whenever we wanted, wherever we wanted, and we still do today. Now, a lot of organizations are moving to that model because of the blending of work and life. But Don had when he started building the company, he had some real insights into how you can individualize and how flex time allows for some of that autonomy and individualization and ownership for individuals. But without that, I would have never been able to get done both those things at the same time. I would have had to quit work and do my doctorate and then come back.
Well, I would dare to say, Jim, that with all the work that you've done and you going through that actually is changing the world. So you have done it. Just maybe just not have realized it back then. And so with all the work that you're still yet to do, the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best.
Thank you, Jim.
Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Jim, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust, yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Jim Harter, are you ready to hoedown?
I'm ready. Yeehaw!
Right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
That's a great question, because I work with a great team. This isn't a very rapid fire answer. I work with a great team, so I don't see limitations other than just continually figuring out how I do what I do best. Because I've been in Gallup a long time, obviously, and the advantage has been I've been able to continually refine my job over time, and so I think it's just continually refining my job to do what I do best.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Know yourself first and be authentic to yourself.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
The team I work with.
What do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
I think making lists. I've got this new notebook now where I don't have to use as much paper. I can just take pictures. So I keep lists. I guess my best tool is to develop lists and check off accomplishments.
And what would be one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? And it could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to It's the Manager on your show notes page as well as your other books.
I would say Abraham Maslow's book, The Business Reader, was a really good. Abraham Maslow had tremendous insights, and my mentor Don was a big fan of his work as well.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus material from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Jim Harter. Okay, Jim, this is my last hump day hold on question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take just one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
I would say simplifying what you present to people, not overdoing it, getting down to the core essence. And I've kind of learned this over time, getting down to the essence of what you're trying to communicate, particularly with research, and simplifying so that it's actionable.
Jim, it was an honor to spend time with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Yeah, Gallup.com is where everything is at. All of our upcoming reports, perspective papers, and articles, and our books, everything is kind of out there and available on Gallup.com.
Jim Harter, thank you for sharing our knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.